So yes, so welcome everybody to this University of the Arctic Thematic Network on Teacher Education for Social Justice and Diversity webinar. And today we will tell about the transatlantic platform project, which is in 3 countries. And I will start with just a couple of slides, and I have to, it's my pleasure to also to say thank you to Anne Burke, because these are the same slides we made together for the ECRA. So I just took some off. So thank you. So Anne is also presenting here with me. And after that, very short presentation from each country. And after that, we can have some discussions. Right, that was the plan. Yeah, so I'll start with the first I think that I need to, sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, here, and now you see the slide. Do you? Not yet.
Yes.
Yes, you see, but I don't. I see it now. Yes, good. Okay, so here we go. So the full name of this project is Voice and Story: Advancing Young Children's Agency Transatlantic Platform, and that is a shortened name. So we were not very good with the short name, but the main point in this project is to look at young children, from 5 to 7, 8. To look at their agency and look at that through 3 case studies in 3 different countries. And as I said, this is funded by Transatlantic Platform funding. And yes, here we have the full name: Socially Innovative Interventions to Foster and to Advance Young Children's Inclusion and Agency in Society Through Voice and Story. So now you understand why nobody can really remember the full name of this, but we know it from our heart that what we are doing, we are looking at the how we listen and how we can listen and how we hear the voice of young children and how stories play a big role in that. And the aim is to advance agencies of young children from specific contexts. So with close cooperation with practitioners, meaning that and this COVID situation has made us made the cooperation with the practitioners very very important, and it also has shown us how important that really is. But we will hear more about that from each country. In Finland, the research focus on Indigenous Sami children. In Canada, marginalized Indigenous and immigrant children, and in the UK, children from diverse ethical and cultural backgrounds. Here are the logos of the funding bodies. We want to thank them for this marvelous opportunity we have had. This has been a great group of people and great cooperation, even though we started with the COVID. So we have never with this group seen each other in physical lives, but all in the network. But I really think that this is a wonderful group of people. And this is our main research question. And there you can see voices, words such as voices, agency, marginalized, land-based, and so on. So those are the teams we are working with the practitioners, with the schools, and with the children. And I wanted to highlight that we are interested in the processes and outcomes. And the processes have become very important during this research so far. So the process of doing something is actually, I would say, even more important than actually the outcome, because the process is the way where we learn and where everybody learns and learns more and finds their ways to do things differently. And theoretical framework comes from sociology of childhood and seeing young children as part of societies, not somebodies that you are waiting to become something, but they are actually important beings and important parts of our society. And often we say that we listen to children, but as the Bucknell and Wall say, the children's voices are usually filtered by adults, and this is something to think about. Really deeply think about that. Do we really hear children's voices, or do we hear what the adults want to hear and filter that with our own thoughts? And in this project, we consider the features of voice, space, audience, and influence are the main part of considering the features of voice. It's not just the words, but it's also space, like in land-based learning or storytelling, and audience is important to make the story or the voice important, and then let the children really have the influence, and so that they are taking seriously what they think about. So these are the references. This is very shortly about the whole project, and now I give floor to our 3 cases. So did we have order which we go, or we'll just start with Canada, because Canada is just the first little box in my screen. Yes, please, and if Diane is here.
So I'll ask Diane. Diane is going to control our slides today. And of course, we'll both speak to the presentation, but introducing Diane Collier from Brock University, who's working on this project with me in Newfoundland. Diane.
And can you confirm that you can see the slides now?
I can see the slides.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. In the project with Anne, we're working in St. John's, Newfoundland. And if you don't know, Newfoundland is an island on the east coast of Canada. And the project is concerned with relationships with the land, identities, children's voices, and what arts practices offer to education research. So in Canada, there's a growing understanding that many children, and those who are often seen as marginalized, such as Indigenous and immigrant children, would benefit greatly from play-based and land-based teaching practices in primary classrooms. And of course, in fact, most children would benefit from these pedagogies and practices, but they're often reserved for schools and children in affluent middle-class neighborhoods. Without professional training opportunities, educators are sometimes challenged when trying to negotiate these issues. So the focus of the Canadian part of the study, and where we work in collaboration with the university, schools, and art galleries, is on how children and educators use artifacts such as special objects and photographs to remember, tell stories, and express identities. And so we're studying the processes of educators, one group at each of 2 schools, and their inquiries and experiments in elevating and listening to children's voices. So you can see here one of the primary ways that the teachers have been communicating with each other and across schools, and even with people across the larger study, is through Twitter. And in the pictures here, you can see children using some of the outdoor materials that that Anne has brought along to support their outdoor play. And yeah, we just wanted to show you what it looked like in the places where they are. So it's been a really
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add in there. In the second picture, you'll see the teachers posted the Twitter. In the back, you'll see there's a forest area that is it has a gating around it. Well, that forest area was discovered to be a part of this school. So the school's initiative now is to reclaim that forest. And it's been really wonderful because there's a lot of Indigenous children that are in this school. Thanks, Diane.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, so we're just giving you a brief overview, and we're not going to go into all the details, but we're going to talk to you about what we did last year and then what the plan is for next year briefly. And of course, there's time for discussion afterwards. We can get into that a little bit more. So some of the activities over the year that have happened have been arts and museums workshops with educators, developing poetry about COVID, sharing photographs of the landscape, their attachments to different places in their lives, and artifacts that are metaphors for their teaching. So that was really exciting. And then in the fall, we had focus groups with teachers. The teachers engaged in sharing circles with the children in their classrooms and did some kind of show and sharing of children's favorite artifacts. And that was really more about their cultural practices and identities rather than the land per se. And then in the winter, there were more focus groups with teachers and provided picture books for teachers on different related topics about cultural identity in land. And then there was some teacher inquiry, so they gave some input into the directions that they wanted to go. And then in the spring, summer, children shared some landscape photos, so they repeated some of the things that the teachers had done right at the beginning, that process. And one thing that we ended up looking into in Newfoundland, mostly classrooms were in person, but in one part of the year, I'm not sure exactly the time frame, but they experienced virtual teaching, and so all the conversations always seem to come back to that. Okay, and then this is a plan for next year. I'll pass it on to Anne. Whoops. Whoops, there we go.
Of course, there's been lots of discussions about the experience that teachers had within their classrooms and how to really advocate for children and to enhance children's voices in different ways through arts-based pedagogies. So starting the fall of 2021, we're going to look at the book called Best Part of Me, and part of that's been done already, but you'll see on the right-hand side, this is a picture that one of the children, so the Best Part of Me is a book that really focus on children's identity and what it is they like about themselves. So the teachers had the children select a body part, and for them to create a line of dialogue or an identity sentence. The best part of me is my mouth can smile and laugh to people. So this is the actual first piece that they're going to do. This was a digital identity photography piece, and each child in the kindergarten grade 1-3 classrooms each had one. And what will happen in the fall is that we have an artist working with them who's doing mobiles. And these mobiles will have the children's faces and their poetry displayed on them. And it will be curated at the Rooms, which is the provincial gallery. But part of that process is also involving teachers in understanding what curation means and what it means to enhance children's voices. It will be spoken, it will be performed. So there will be many other things that will go along with the photographs to allow for children's voices to be shared within community, within the school, and within for teachers to see different pedagogies. The winter 2022 will have oral storytelling about the land. This is based on landscape photos, storytelling workshops, oral story artists we're working with. There'll be recordings, photos, and observational data. And then spring 2022, we're looking at a map making of local spaces and stories. So they'll be artist-led with multimodal maps, teacher-directed, and the observational data will be collected as well as the process documentation. Because our goal here is to really look at pedagogical practices of teachers using arts-based influences to enhance voice. And there will be interviews with teachers, with the final exhibit being around teachers' pedagogies that will be shared with other teachers through a small workshop that will be hosted at the Rooms. As you can see, the data collection is quite large. It's 10 teachers, 2 schools, and over 100 children are participating. Thank you, Diane. So the emergent findings so far, we just sort of will touch on those because we know that we want to hold space for other discussions. So we are looking at how these pedagogies work, but the interesting thing is if you look at the photos, you'll see that much of our work has been collected through the virtual classroom. Okay, so what it is that's going on is we have, teachers looking at how arts based practices and artifact sharing really does change when we have to look at social distancing and the ways in which it's shared. So we noticed a lot of our findings were around that and how children interacted and shared their stories. We did see a lot of cultural identities and memories, so it was very interesting to see what children brought in. And who brought those things in. And a lot of teachers talked about how the artifacts allowed for shifts in voice. So inviting some children in more so, as well as children in virtual spaces being finding that their voice was louder in other spaces, such as opposed to the classroom. And looking what does it mean to teach in different spaces and places and what that means for the child or learning for the teacher's pedagogical practices to enhance voice. And then, of course, looking at different things that children bring. Like we found that children who, a lot of immigrant children brought things that were very culturally that they could identify with, and memories, as well as other children brought photographs. So it was very interesting to see what was brought and shared. And of course, directions in the way that we look at the different types of findings, through virtual as well as in person. Thank you, Diane. So the significance of the study that we're finding is that we're looking at how virtual spaces, as well as these different arts-based pedagogies, really transform classroom pedagogies, the way that teachers hear and see children in the classroom. We're seeing how it's individual and collective empowerment and well-being for both children, families, and teachers, and in spaces. And we're really thinking about what that means for social cohesion, and why in this study, in particular, what that meant within each school, within the significance of being in Newfoundland as well during a pandemic. Thank you. So going forward, of course, some of the issues that we'll talk about is the research ethics challenges of research in virtual spaces and the benefits of research in virtual spaces. So with that, I'll close and turn it over to the next presentation. Thank you.
Would that be UK, Mhairi and Susan?
Thank you, Tuija. I will share my slides. So thanks very much, Anne. It's always really interesting to see between our meetings how things move on. So I'm introducing, on behalf of my colleagues Susan Atkinson and I, the case study from the UK, and I should say it's actually England, because obviously the 4 nations of the UK have separate educational systems. So in the UK, we were particularly interested in looking at the pedagogical decision making that teachers were making when they were working with very diverse communities. And so one of the things that we did was we chose 2 schools very specifically because we knew there was already very good practice in there, because they were dealing with and actually saw as a benefit to the whole learning process, the whole social environment, the fact that they had very, very diverse communities within their schools. So one of the schools is Mayfield. It's based in Cambridge, and because they have so many families coming in for 3 years doing doctoral study and then moving away again often, they can have up to 18 languages in each of their classes. And the other school is Boothroyd Primary Academy, which is based in West Yorkshire, and although they have recent immigration, families that have immigrated recently to the UK, but they also have very large communities of 5th or 6th generation families from Southeast Asia who came to work in the textile mills, but who retain their culture and their language in their home communities. So those were the 2 schools that we were working with. And the research questions we really wanted to answer we wanted to know what were the pedagogical decisions that the teachers were making, what were the principles that underpinned those decisions that they were making, both on a short term, every day in class, but also in a long term, to include all the young children in the learning in really authentic and meaningful ways. What were the things that were working really well for them, and what were the things that were still troubling them that they wanted to improve? The third question is one that I think we haven't really been able to tackle yet, because we haven't been able to interview the children themselves. Because the plan was that the methodology would be a co-participatory classroom ethnography, where Susan and I would go in. Susan was to be attached to Boothroyd, I was to be attached to Mayfield down in Cambridge. We were going to go in about a week every month and be an extra pair of hands for the teachers and do participant observation, talk to the children, talk to the staff, talk to the families. And of course, COVID happened. And we panicked, and then we remembered what amazing schools we were working with. And so what the teachers did was they volunteered to do the data collection for us, and we are so profoundly thankful to them for their engagement and commitment to the project. They do digital collection of videos and photos as part of a kind of lesson study professional review. And what they did was they did a collection of videos and photographs with accompanying written reflections, which they shared digitally with us, but also with the other school. Susan and I did follow-up individual interviews, and then as the project went on, we started to doing group interviews, and then we ended up doing actually all of the discussion across both schools and with both of us. And the teachers also asked us, because I think one of the benefits of working this way has been that almost the teacher's voice and agency has been further enhanced. They got to choose what videos and photos that they shared with us. And I think that brings a very distinctive flavour to the data that we've collected. And it just feels like their voice and agency have been listened to. I have to say, Susan and I are also looking forward to getting into the schools to see them. But it just moved the power differential between us as researchers and them as the staff working in the classrooms to a very different space. It also allowed working digitally, because everything has happened online. It has also allowed us to work much more across the two schools. And almost as we're doing the analysis, as we meet with the teachers to begin to come to common understandings of what the emergent themes were, rather than Susan and I going away, doing the analysis and saying, well, this is what we think we've found. We've been able to go back, and again, so they've had more agency, I think, as well, as they've said, oh, yeah, that resonates with us, or that doesn't resonate with us. To the point where they're also finding it more helpful for themselves as teachers. So I think we've more confidence about having impact on practice at the end of the project, because we're seeing that them being able to articulate things in these meetings and through all the different digital platforms we're using, it's allowing them time to think about their practice and talk to others about it. To the point where they actually said, the meetings occasionally at the end of the day aren't sufficient. Could you set up a shared Padlet where we could have the questions that we're looking at and have sort of ongoing professional dialogue about how we're meeting the challenges within our classrooms? So it's been a very different but very rewarding way to work. And then just very briefly, some of our initial emergent findings. One of them, which actually this is one of the findings, this notion of trust. And it came as a surprise to the teachers when we suggested this to them. But it's something that they're really taking on board. And actually, one of the head teachers is going to do a master's in research to explore this in more detail. It's this notion that you have to have trust within the whole staff and actually the whole school community. And we're almost seeing a sort of secular thing where the head teachers trust the teachers to make the right pedagogical choices for the young people who are in their classrooms. And then the teachers then feel enabled to trust the children to engage with the learning if they make sure that the conditions are right. The children then trust the teachers to listen to them and provide audience and influence. And the teachers know that if things aren't working in their classroom and maybe a child isn't fully involved, that they can go to the head teacher for advice. So it's quite secular, but we think that notion of trust, which is very much at odds with English educational policy at the moment, is a really important emergent finding that facilitates voice and agency. And that links with collaboration, because with the online nature of much of the learning over the last year, parents and other family members also needed to be included in that commitment to voice and agency, making sure that all the voices were heard. And then place. That's been a really important emergent finding, which the schools were beginning to explore, but seems to be coming through more strongly now. That notion of outdoors as a place where there were fewer distractions to the listening process. And the children seemed to respond differently when they were out in the outdoor spaces at the school than when they're indoors. And as we've been analysing it over the summer, we've talked about the fact that the teachers feel that there's a reduction in the power dynamic when they start, not just outside the nursery or the year one, but actually in the wild spaces that they've created at the school. And over the summer, as I've been further analysing and going through the transcriptions, I'm beginning to think and explore, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with the teachers. I'm beginning to think that it's not a reduction in the power dynamic, which is so important, but it's more to do, if we draw on Beaton and Voloshinov's work, is it that out there the teachers are able to work with in a different way within that power differential, because that staff student power differential can often get in the way of really hearing the children's voices and their agency within their learning. So very, very brief summary of the first year. And as I say, the second year, we're hoping to actually get back into classrooms and actually get to talk to the children as well. Thanks very much. And I think, is it going to Finland now? I shall stop sharing to Pigga and Hanna.
Thank you. I'm Helander from University of Lapland, but I also work as a project manager in the pilot project on distance education of Sami languages.
Yes, and my name is Pigga Keskitalo. I'm also researcher at the University of Lapland, Faculty of Education. And today we are going to talk about this case study, which is concerning Sami language distance education. And in this project, we were keen to see that how can the digitally and via online means organized Sami language education, which is threatened language, and in Finland there's 3 separate Sami languages spoken. So how can those organizations be culturally appropriate in means to foster children's voice and agency?
I will first open a little the situation of Sami language education in Finland. So Basic Education Act ensures the teaching in Sami languages for pupils living in the Sami homeland. And you can see the Sami homeland in the map. However, 75% of Sami children and young people live outside this homeland, and this means about 2,000 children and young people for whom the law does not guarantee the right to study Sami language. Outside this homeland, only few municipalities have enough pupils to form a teaching group, and teachers are hard to find. So for most of these pupils, distance education is the only possibility to learn the language of their family. And the pilot project on distance education in the Sami languages was founded 2018 to solve this problem. It offers online supplementary Sami language teaching for basic education pupils and upper secondary students outside the Sami homeland.
In the map, you will find those places where pupils are living. So some of the pupils located in the map also participated into this study. So this study has been conducted in near cooperation with the Sami language distance education project, which is managed and hosted by the municipality of Utsjoki. And we were working with 6 and 7 years old children, those who are attending to initial education and as a first graders in primary schools. And those small children are actually then attending to 2 hours Sami language classes via online means in different practical solutions. So first we conducted this kind of baseline audit study, and it was conducted already a year ago, and we found out that based on children's interviews, and we have also interviewed parents and teachers. So children's motivation to study and sense of belonging to the language is relatively high, and that makes also then studying and teaching Sami language for those children quite easy. So this kind of quite important notion that their identities are connected to their cultures and to their families' backgrounds, it made then the basis for this study, and we started then to create these innovations in near cooperation with teachers.
I will tell a little about this innovation. We had 3 innovations: land-based pedagogy, play, and storytelling. And this land-based pedagogy was carried out through Pigga innovation. The teacher, Inari-Sami teacher Hanna had made a Pigga grid with the hint pictures. So the task was, for example, to photograph something yellow. The pupils went out in the middle of the class to observe nature and to take pictures. And the teacher had many ideas how to utilize these pictures afterwards. For example, children can choose one of the pictures and write a story about it, or instead of writing, they can record their own voices. Our Northern Sami teacher Satu Pieski tried how this play, how can she utilize play in the class. And in the play innovation, children got to shop at the toy store. The teacher had collected various toys, which she presented to the pupils with a documentary camera. And we have these, Sunna Kitti has made these pictures so that you can have an idea about these innovations, because it's so hard to actually take a picture from the distance education situation or distance teaching situation. And the teacher had also small shopping carts in which he collected toys that children chose, and each children had 10 euros, and they had to calculate what that was enough for, and all this was done in Sami language. And the third innovation, storytelling, that was done in our Gold Sami lessons. Sirkka Sanila and Sonia Mosnikov were the teachers. And the storytelling innovation utilized language immersion. And the children heard the traditional Sami story only in Sami language. But the understanding the story was supported by images and effect sounds. The teacher, for example, mimicked the sounds of animals. And finally, in the end of the lesson, understanding was ensured by discussing the story with the children.
Yes, and we have already conducted all the cycles that was concerning this innovation study. So we have conducted this study so that after this baseline audit modus, first round of innovation was conducted, and then teachers were putting some corrections to the innovation and conducted that innovation again. So some of the conclusions we want to highlight that like UK case also indicated, so the teachers were really smart in supporting these indigenous children's agency and voice. And actually those actions that were presented in Hanna's slides previously and in Kitti's photos, those actions were chosen by children and with the reality that when they traveled, the fact is that most of the children are living in city areas outside the Sami core areas in southern Finland. So they traveled quite a lot then to meet relatives up north into Sami core areas. So this was one kind of place where children noted that these trips are important, and they like enjoy talking Sami with relatives, and they like the sceneries and landscapes. And also this was a place then that teachers mostly benefited, because then they could create space for children to talk about these journeys with families up north. So I think this children's agency and voice was promoted quite a lot, and teachers were very smart in that. And also we noticed that when teachers reported that actually they have always wanted to make these kind of innovations, but they were so loaded with the daily practices, and also in that sense may be lonely, but they felt that this kind of professional growth was possible then through this kind of professional support which this project was then promoting. I think that what we can learn from this is that teachers who work with demanding educational context, and teachers in general, they need this kind of place and space for their professional growth. So this is call for principals and school leaders to put processes so that teachers will then have opportunities to this kind of professional growth. Teachers reported that when they got a place and space and support for this kind of professional growth, so they could put their dreams into reality, because this project of course then gave also these kind of resources that teachers needed. Project also realized that maybe these kind of indigenous education contexts and educational contexts that are concerning marginalized groups, there are many kinds of challenges and lacks, and also diasporic connections to the culture. So we found that we can also solve out some of the challenges with this kind of enlarged cooperation. So for example, which is also a very big concern in Sami language education, is that there is lack of teaching materials, or either those materials are inappropriate. And then finally, we want to highlight that as this threatened Sami language distance education context with hopefully with 2,000 kids, but there is only 110 attending at the moment. So this kind of solutions need to be made permanent, but I know that there's processes between Finnish Sami Parliament and Finnish government, maybe to find out, or educational ministries, to find out these kind of permanent solutions. But we also see on based reports of parents and those interviews conducted with children that they like demand also or need this kind of solutions, as it is too tiring every year be in a situation where the solutions are not given, but they have to demand those every year. So yes, do you want to say something, Hanna? Adding?
Not really. You said almost all.
Good. Thank you very much for the three themes, and now we have a couple of minutes time for discussion and questions, and we welcome them from audience or then other groups of people like British and Anne presented some very interesting discussion points at the end of Canadian presentation. So maybe we can start with those questions that were at the end of Diane's and Anne's presentation. Could you, Diane, just quickly hop there where you had those three questions?
So the three questions were actually posed around issues that were around research ethics, so REB boards with universities. And then the second was the challenges of research in virtual spaces. And that again was a research ethic with REB, but also with school boards and as well as parents, and understanding how that research would take place. And then of course the benefits of research in virtual spaces. So I will open up the discussion topics. So if you have questions about that, I guess that we could talk briefly to each side about those. When the study was actually, I guess, when we applied for the grant, one of the key things about the grant is having participant researcher or research partners. And part of that meant that we had to get a letter from our partners saying that they would participate in the research and be able to, not just for the organization, but also for teachers as well who were interested in the study. So in Canada, we contacted the school board, and the school board had presented us with two different schools that were interested in the study after they had sent the study out for review. We contacted the school principals, and both principals agreed that they would like to write a letter of support of our research. And they had teachers in place already that had agreed to be a part of the research study. But when we went through ethics, the REB at Memorial, they said that it was still participant. We were still trying to recruit participants, although we actually did have teachers in schools that had letters that said that they were willing to begin the research in a virtual format. Because the university had shut down due to the pandemic, understandably, they weren't reviewing any kind of ethics protocols at that time. When they did open, they did say to us that they still would not review it because the research was in person, even when we had explained to them that the research would not begin until health and advisories were allowed and that we were allowed to enter schools. So we then revised again the REB, the ethics proposal, for it to become a virtual piece. And in doing that, there were some challenges in the virtual piece, because then we had to work with the school board again, which was not a challenge. It was great because they decided that they wished to use one particular platform for interviewing teachers and focus groups, as well as interviewing children in the classroom and observations. But when we came back to the school, to the REB, even though we had permission of the school board and the school board had agreed what they wanted to do, the REB still wanted more information to be provided, asking questions and wishing to know if the school board had carefully considered the choice that they'd made. So these were some about which platform, which was a Google platform that the school board uses. and they use Google Classroom. So they wanted everything to be within that capacity. So that was one of the challenges that we found, where it wasn't taken into consideration that the school board, the teachers, the families, and the children, in what they wished and desired for the study to take place was not taken into consideration. So that was one research ethic issue that we had. I don't know about others. Can I ask others what happened within their situation, and were they delayed in what ways?
Maybe Mhairi, you can tell some words. And just before you start, I think that how do you actually did the ethics tells about adults' interpretation of what children want. So that was I think, that good example of.
It is a really good example of interpretation and speaking for children, which was something that was very frustrating, especially looking at what this research was trying to do. You're right.
Yeah. But Mhairi, please.
Yes, I think that's an ongoing issue, that even those who are working with children often still see them as gatekeepers. And I've found on a number of projects now where I say, but I would like to get the children's permission. And I've seen heads say, no, you don't need the children's permission. It's just part of their schoolwork. So I always end up having to get sort of oral permissions from the children. With the ethics in England, we were very fortunate in that a lot of the research that we do is online research. A lot of our teaching, a lot of our doctoral supervision is all undertaken online, and we have a department of digital transformation in education. So the move, originally we applied for ethical permission to go into the schools and be participant observers, and we didn't have to change that much. We just had to resubmit with the additional stuff around COVID and the fact that we were doing it online, and it went through very smoothly at the university. And again, I think, although I find it sometimes, because I'm fairly new to the English system, quite interesting that the schools have so much agency around what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and the heads of the multi-academy trusts or the schools. It meant that actually getting the teachers on board with helping just meant that the head teachers were able to tick the box, and they liaised with the school boards for us, which was really, really helpful. So we didn't get tied up in lots of sort of, legal aspects there. I think the issue then was, once we were online, because both the university and the two schools already had online platforms that we were using and had approved, but then the schools were already using to communicate with the parents. It was about the information sharing between the three, and which bits they were willing to share with the parents and which bits they were willing to share with us. So it was much more a sort of practical negotiation of what do we share and how do we share it, in ways that didn't significantly add to the teacher's workload. Because at one point we had thought that we would just have access to the school online repositories, and then the teachers wouldn't have to reload them. And in the end, we decided we didn't really want to have access to all of their confidential material. So we did use a separate platform, which we worried then about the workload for the teachers. But in the end, I think that decision making that the teachers had to do, where they thought, right, that's a video I'm going to share with the researchers in the other school, that almost added a level of reflection to the process that has been helpful for the actual project. But I know that Pigga, you had ethical issues around interviewing children, didn't you?
Yeah, basically everything comes of course from the ethical guidelines, those national and European Union level guidelines that we for sure follow, and all those indigenous ethical guidelines, or they are at that level that we just like apply them institutionally and country-based. And and research project based. Ethical review was conducted at the university level in Finland quite carefully, and we reported every modus quite carefully. And based on that, then when COVID came suddenly, so when we needed then to go and meet those children, we were not then allowed to do that. So everything was conducted basically then online, and then because of those ethical restrictions, it caused some of the practical challenges then to like how to gather data with young children, because there is COVID-19 and we have got restrictions concerning the ethics. For example, that we cannot take video recordings because, we have not had solutions for that in ethical review process. So maybe Hanna, as a project leader of that Sami language distance education project and as a researcher at the University of Lapland, has also very practical knowledge of that ethical things, because she conducted then those interviews with young children face to face online, but not actually face to face.
Yeah, we used Teams, what is interviews. It was same platform that the children were using, like in the distance education. But they did see me, but because I was recording the voice, I said that don't put your camera on. So I only heard their voices, and some of the message maybe was lost in that. But I think after all it went okay. Like it was my first time to interview children, and I didn't, even though I work as a project manager in the distance education project, I didn't know these children before. But even though I think we get a good material from these children, and best was these group interviews. Then the children opened up a little more.
Thank you, Hanna and Pigga. Just I think that we have time for one short comment or question, and that goes to Mhairi. You said you want to say something.
I guess it's as we're speaking about the ethics, I'm thinking about I was involved in commissioning the last version of the BERA ethical guidelines, which are the ones that are generally used in the UK, and I guess that's a problem really with ethical guidelines, because how we are working online is moving so fast, and yet we only review those guidelines every 5 years. And it almost feels that we need to review them following COVID, because I know there's lots of discussion around using visuals and doing things online, and it feels like we probably need to really think through those ethical guidelines in each of our countries based on our experiences during, the pandemic. Because I think things have changed probably since we last wrote them.
Yes, I think that that's a good ending point to our webinar, to really think about that, and how the world has changed, and probably also the world of doing research have changed permanently, and we have found our ways around what we first thought that are huge challenges and we can never make it, but we actually have made it in many ways as we planned, and with alterations we have had wonderful results, even though we must say that we have also had challenges. We don't deny them either, but thank you very much for attending, and thank you if you listen to recording. Thank you for listening to recording. Okay, bye-bye.